thank you so much, Abby, for having me here. This has definitely been a dream come true, and this has been a labor of love for the last 3 years, working on all of this art pre-pandemic to the middle of the pandemic and then to finally after. And so I greatly appreciate the opportunity. So for those of you who don't know me, I will go into a little bit of history about that first. I know it's cliche to say I've been an artist my whole life, but for all of us artists, that's pretty much true. I went to the University of North Texas and actually have a BFA in drawing and painting, of all things too. And while I was there, we were forced to kind of dabble in the different disciplines, from ceramics to printmaking and photography. And so I just immersed myself into the darkroom, and you couldn't get me out of there. In fact, I stayed in university for an extra semester to take additional photography classes. And at that point, my work actually started becoming more mixed media collage. So I kind of started to steer a little bit away from painting and bring a lot more photography elements into my work. And so at that time, it was more, hands-on, glue, paint, everything smeared all over. So I kind of look at the work that I'm doing now to be very similar to that, but instead I'm using a computer and mixing photographs as opposed to paint and glue and paper. After college, I started working at an advertising agency, which I had absolutely no graphic design abilities whatsoever, and sadly put my art on the shelf for quite a bit. I took a few classes here and there, but started a payroll company, which is a whole other story, and a bottle of wine later. So if anybody's interested, let me know. But it had that going for quite a while there too. And then it wasn't until I met my husband, who I refer to as Captain Awesome, who is actually getting ready to finish his PhD. So he's going to get a promotion to Dr. Awesome here pretty soon. But he took one look at my work and was like, "Why do you own a payroll company when this is what you create? You need to be doing this." And so it wasn't long after that I sold my company, and I went to the Rocky Mountain School of Photography up in Missoula, Montana in 2012 for what I consider to be like the best summer of my life. It was 3 months long. I was with another 60 students from the ages of 18 to about 65 or so. And we were just totally immersed in it for the entire time in one of the most beautiful places, as well. And so it was just a breathtaking experience. And it was there that I learned Photoshop. So before that, I was a bit of a purist. It actually took me a really long time to get away from film photography. I think I kind of started to inch over maybe in 2005 and got my first little cool pics, and it was just a snap and shoot camera, and not a big deal there. But it wasn't until I think 2010, actually my husband bought me my first digital camera after we got engaged. And so that was, not even that long ago in the whole world of digital actually. But when I learned Photoshop and learned how to kind of composite the works together, that's kind of when everything clicked in my head. And I was able to say, oh my God, I can actually create the things that are floating around in here in a way that I never could before. So it really opened up my eyes and a lot of opportunities to really build myself out as an artist. And then in 2013, we moved away from Texas and from everything that I knew. And that's when I think more or less this type of work was born. So sometimes moving away from everything you know and love is kind of a great way to, allow art to heal you. And whether it's mundane stuff or really kind of world-changing stuff, it's, art I think is that way for just about everybody. But it was certainly that thing for me. And even though we moved away to Connecticut, it wasn't the best place for us, but it was necessary. I think everything does happen for a reason. And I think if I needed to move to Connecticut so I could start working on this type of art and be immersed in it and again, then it was totally worth it. So that's more or less kind of the history behind my art world. So this body of work, in order to really talk about what it means, I need to kind of tell you where that all derived from as well. So I grew up in a Catholic household. But religion and me were not such great friends. And we were kind of the family that only went to church during the major holidays at first. And then after my parents divorced when I was 7, my father found great comfort in going to church. And soon he became more adamant that we join him in that pursuit. And he's extremely passionate about it. He's actually in about almost 10 years, he will be a deacon, ordained deacon in the Catholic Church for about 10 years. So he went as far as he could possibly go. And I love and admire him for his passion and his faith, but it wasn't my journey. It didn't feel right for me. And I was one of those obnoxious, rebellious teenagers. And when we were going through CCD classes and whatnot, I was questioning everything. This doesn't make sense to me. Why, if you can repent on your deathbed, what difference does it make if you do it through the rest of your days? Stuff like that. Right? It's like, I'm just going to be a teenager and then it'll all be okay. But I know I drove my teacher crazy. And as soon as I found out that it was my choice to whether or not I wanted to continue through that course and become confirmed in the Catholic Church, I was like, I didn't realize that this was my choice. And now that I do know, I'm going to part ways and thank you very much, but I'm going to move on. And so there was a lot of that. And, I know it wasn't well received on the other end, but there were also other things that kind of happened throughout my days, even in my youth and in my college and early 20s and whatnot. But I found that regardless of the religion, sometimes the more devout people became, the more judgmental they became. And there was a lot of preaching that happened, or if you choose this route, then you're damned for eternity versus this route. And oh my God, only a third of the world's population is actually Christian. And that was kind of an eye-opening thing too for some people in our class too, to realize like, oh my God, something that we believe in, and only a third of the world actually believes that. And so it was, there was a lot of that kind of going through my worldview. And other things too that really I had difficulty with was the personification of a supreme being as being human. It's like, how in the world are we supposed to encapsulate something that's supposed to epitomize love and forgiveness and put it in the body of a man or a woman, regardless of gender? I mean, how is that even possible? And we're so fallible and we make some horrible mistakes and errors in judgment. We're capable of a lot, but we can do some horrible things too. So it's like, how can we personify something that it's supposed to be all-encompassing as being human? And so that was another massive struggle that I had to deal with, that sometimes when people approached me about it, I got viscerally uncomfortable and would just kind of shut down altogether. So, but that's not to say that I didn't believe, because I absolutely do believe that there is something greater out there. I mean, look at our bodies, for an example. I mean, there's so many systems in place that are running in perfect unison that had to have been designed by some artistic creator, architect of some sort. And I don't think it's any surprise that our bodies make up, or 70% make up water, is the same as the earth, right? Or that women's cycles are very much in line with that of the moon. So there has to be something else out there that is orchestrating something from afar, but I just can't look at it as if it's in this kind of form. So jump ahead, or I guess skip back to maybe about 5.5 years or so, and we moved here to Colorado. So I'm originally from Texas. I grew up in Houston and then went to school up in Denton. And we jumped around quite a bit. My husband's a DoD contractor, and so we moved from place to place. And we finally decided to land here in Colorado Springs because we'd driven through a couple of times, and it just felt like home. I mean, my God, there's this gorgeous mountain facing the right direction, that I get to see out my front window every day. And as it turns out, I have these gorgeous neighbors that live down the street who had a different worldview as it pertains to spirituality. And I had been dabbling in kind of the new age stuff, I think, my whole life too. I think that was maybe part of the rebellious side of me as well too. It's like, well, instead of going this route, I'm gonna look at auras and crystals and read astrology and all that other fun stuff. But my neighbor actually opened up my eyes to Reiki, and I found out she was a Reiki master, and I took one of her classes. And that in itself was a very kind of eye-opening experience, just to understand how energy flows and how it can flow through anybody and heal other people. That gift isn't necessarily reserved for, one or a few, but really it's something that we are all kind of capable of. And it shows on a bigger level too, how connected we really are to everything, not just ourselves and not just standing in this space, but to the bigger picture of everything that exists. And so I was kind of hooked up to that. And I started doing a bunch of different meditations. I joined a spirituality book club. We were reading all kinds of things on the untethered soul and the power of 8 and becoming supernatural and tattoos on the heart and all kinds of amazing things like that. And then I also joined mindvalley.com. If any of you guys are familiar with that, it's kind of this very spiritual, it's online, mindvalley.com. And you can take all different kinds of classes on there too to help enhancing not only your spiritual mindset too, but entrepreneurism and health and all kinds of good stuff. So from there, I've jumped into different aspects of astral projection and intuition and chakra healing. And I mean, and it's so fascinating. It's absolutely fascinating. But that's been kind of a fun little journey that I have done there. But also my husband and I, sometimes especially after a glass of wine or two, we start to wax philosophical and we'll start talking about all kinds of worldviews. And, Carl Sagan jumped into it at one point, talking about multi-dimensions. And he had this one fascinating little YouTube that talked about dimensions, basically, and how we are, in this three-dimensional form can only see certain things. And imagine if you were actually only in 2 dimensions, if you were a shape, and if things that were actually 3 dimensions started to fall within your purview, you wouldn't actually see them for what they are. You would only see them as a certain plane, and maybe they blip in and out, but that would be really all your acknowledgement of them. And so talking about the different multiple dimensions that exist out there, and that how us being in this 3-dimensional form makes it really virtually impossible for us to see and experience what anything outside in those dimensions might actually pertain. So that in itself dropped us into a whole thing about string theory. So I went down another rabbit hole. And I think the one fascinating thing too about all of this, and at least living in this day and age, is recognizing that there are a lot of aspects of science that do support some of these more spiritual mindset as well. And even if they are only theorized to some degree, it's still quite fascinating. I'm going to read this because I can't remember it to save my life. But, and this is part of a little shameless plug, a little exhibition book that I have back there. But I do have little sections in each, some of the pages that talk to the little pieces of art. This one here, Swimming Between Dimensions, is actually what I created after going down that rabbit hole of string theory. But one of the things I learned was that, these other dimensions are so small that we're incapable of actually seeing them with our own eyes. That space is not empty, but at the most basic level, particles are comprised of a filament of energy vibrating at different frequencies. These dancing filaments of energy make up the landscape of the universe, creating unification in everything we can see, touch, etc. The theory is a mathematical equation, but could it also be an energy equation? These dimensions by no means function in straight lines, but fold in on themselves. And branching out into these other dimensions, we learn that time is not linear. It's an idea translated across many science fiction genres. And if anybody has ever seen Interstellar, I encourage you to watch that movie at least 5 times, because you need to see it at least twice in order to see it once, really. But they give an perfect example of that. And then the further notion suggests that we can travel through these dimensions and access other universes, parallel or otherwise. So it got me thinking, which of course is always dangerous. If we are made up of the same particles at the most basic level, vibrating with energy, this signifies that we are not separate from the universe, but very much an active part of it. Energy is neither created nor destroyed, right? So if energy flows freely, it's unconstrained, it travels between space, across galaxies, and through dimensions. If we are also energy, should we not be able to flow in the same way? And then perhaps tied to this 3-dimensional body, the perception of what we are capable of is limiting, but you hear about those who can transcend during meditation. Is it too far of a stretch to believe that we can cross into other dimensions during meditation, that we can access the far recesses of time and space with our minds? So I know these ideas are a lot that are out there, but I know there's a lot of things that we didn't understand a long time ago that were once kind of science fiction and have now become science fact. So it's nice to kind of open my mind to the possibilities. And within this, I'm going to share a kind of personal anecdote that kind of aligns with this. But I remember during one of my meditations, I don't remember what the purpose of it was, but I drifted in and out and found myself staring at my father, who was a toddler at the time. Mm-hmm. And his eyes were just wide and just Googling at me, and then it dawned on me for a moment that he wasn't looking at me. He was looking at my grandmother. And there was such a wave of love that came over me that it brought tears to my eyes, even now. And it made me think for a moment that I wonder if it's even possible that I was actually in that moment as my grandmother, experiencing that love for her son, my father, through those eyes. And it was just the most beautiful thing. I think these meditations specifically, what I have found to be the most common thread through all of them is really the love. And it comes at you so intensely and it kind of knocks you off your feet and out of nowhere. It's so unconditional. And so I would encourage you, if you guys haven't experienced that, to definitely give that a go. But going back to religion, I was in Bali right before the pandemic. I think that was the last major trip that I got to take before the pandemic. And I came across this man, a stranger, and somehow we got on the topic of religion. And he said, you know what, I really do think that we are all looking at the same mountain, but we just have different experiences. We just have different perspectives. It's all the same mountain though. And they all, to the most degree at the root of everything, resonate and sing the same praises. And it's okay that we experience things in different ways and that we have, all the religions are different to some degree. It's all the same thing. And so I don't think it really matters what one believes at the end of the day. But I'm going to do a quick little energy exercise with you guys. And then I'm going to start talking a little bit more about this work. So just to kind of play with this notion of energy, just bear with me. But I want you to take your two hands and I want you to rub your bottom knuckles together. And I want you to do it very vigorously, back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. And it's going to feel friction. You're going to feel to some degree like you're, Mr. Miyagi getting ready to warm up Danielson before his big race of the Karate Kid. Okay, and now I want you to stop and just hold your hands in front of each other. And you should be able to, because I can feel it very clearly. Feel the energy between your hands, kind of this pulsing that is also happening within your fingers. And so that's the energy that exists between all of us. And if you feel ever so brave, you can also hold up to your neighbors and you can feel. But it's a pretty cool feeling. Okay. So to talk about the work a little bit. So again, just in case you're not aware, I am a photographer, but it's definitely more involved than that. I do take multiple photographs and I seamlessly stitch them together in post using either Photoshop or one other software called On One Software to create these pieces. They are very painterly feeling. I'm sure that's my drawing and painting degree that comes out, but I do put layers on top of them to also kind of give them that effect. So this work, of course, obviously speaks to the very kind of spiritual side of things that I've been navigating for the last several years. The clouds certainly represent kind of that more mystical side of things. They change shape, they're capable of holding water, but they're weightless at the same time. They can magically appear and disappear. I like to also blur perspectives. So that is really to kind of mimic the multiversal dimensional world that we live in to some degree too. So like specifically with this one, where are we looking at the water or are we looking at the clouds? I kind of try to play with those perspectives a little bit too. And then birds do tend to make an appearance as well because I find them so fascinating. I think they're a little probably closer in touch with the spirit world, but they can also exist on land as well as water, as well as in the air, and they do it so effortlessly. So looking at all those states of matter is kind of a representation of the different dimensions that we exist in. So that's kind of what the symbolism to some degree is in these pieces. Concepts kind of range from everything from trying to find our purpose in life to overcoming fear. I think overcoming fear is actually a big concept that shows up in a lot of work, not just this series, but a lot of my other work that I create. Manifestation, finding that perfect flow state, dealing with time and space, that driving fire that we find within all of us, especially when times are tough. and then the hope and connection and love that we all feel, that we are, again, all connected with each other. So the work, it consists of a lot of different photographs from a bunch of different places. So one, my home, for, if I'm setting up, moving furniture, oftentimes my husband will come up from out of the basement where his office is, and I have completely rearranged the living room to kind of set up stuff in my home and space using kind of a clean slate. There's also, this one was actually photographed on top of Pikes Peak and in my studio space. So this whole background here is from on top of the mountain. There's one that I think is in the other room that was from Bali. There's one from France. There's many that are outside or looking outside the window of a 737. So I'm often looking out the window and sitting at the window seat on my plane rides to capture the clouds as they're moving and unfolding outside the window. And then the biggest thing too was actually Namibia. So yeah, I have two lovely ladies here that accompanied me to Namibia. It was my first trip since the pandemic. It was an amazing experience, and there were 6 of us brave souls that went out there, and that was my goal to go out there and finish the series. And so 8 of the pieces that you see here are from basically almost all of them. There's one that's from the desert, but so 7 are from a little place called Kolmanskop, which was a diamond mine that the Germans had occupied in the early 1900s. And when the diamonds dried up right around World War I, and they discovered diamonds further south, they just up and left, vacated everything. And so this particular little village was probably about 30 or 40 houses. And once once everybody was gone, the Mother Nature just tried to assume it again. And so broken windows and doors allowed for all of the sand to blow in. The town sat about 15 kilometers off of the Atlantic Ocean. So for those of you who don't know, Namibia is just north of South Africa on the western coast. So it was not too far from the Atlantic Ocean, so the winds blew really strong. Actually, it was really even pretty strong that day. So all the sand that you actually see in these places are actually there. Yeah. So that was the whole point of why I wanted to go on that trip to begin with too, because Sandy and I were the only ones that stayed the whole day. We must have been there for about 11 hours. Oh my God. And I think I missed 3 buildings too, but by then I was exhausted, so exhausted. And I took probably, it was about 1/5 of the photographs that I took within the 15-day trip on this one day alone. So it was incredible. I'm sure there's going to be more work coming out of this for probably a while. So, before I move on, I know I've been talking a lot. I'll open it up for questions here in just a moment, but I do, before I begin with I do want to say this. Yes, this work is definitely, a spiritual journey. It's a personal narrative. I think a lot of artists, it's autobiographical, even if it's about something completely different. So it's definitely a gift to myself, but it's also a gift to my father. So I couldn't meet him in the same way that he experienced his own faith, but this was my way to meet him halfway, in my own most authentic way. So I'm going to dedicate this to my father. Okay, before I move on to the questions, we had a poem reading that happened the other day, and unfortunately one of our poets wasn't able to make it. She unfortunately got really, really sick. And so she sent me her poems, and I told her I would read them out loud for her, and we're recording it so that way she can get to experience it and be a part of that experience as well. So, but before I start, I just want to take a quick moment, and if, collectively, if we can just have it in our minds, it doesn't matter that you don't know who she is. Her name is Lindsay Maroney. Just send her a quick loving thought and for a speedy recovery, that hopefully she'll be able to, feel much better sooner. So I'm going to just read 2 poems. They're not very long. And she did tell me which ones that kind of inspired the poems. And they both brought tears to my eyes. So I hope that I don't start crying here, but it's possible. Okay. So the first one is titled Yaya. And it is inspired by Wonder Wander, which is the one with the legs coming out of the clouds there in the back.
Okay.
So it says, Yaya, I wish I could have been there for your birth. To have seen feet that only ever known flight, having never touched the ground, skin unlined, you've yet to lay down your patterns, yet to have worried trails around your lips and eyes or the stretch of your brow, your skull hard and round in the cup of my hand, perfect, open on top just slightly, moving. What it would be to hold you then while still knowing you now, grasp the circumference of your entire life, hard and soft in the palm of my hand. Confuse time and kiss my origin, and love where we will go, have gone. And this other one is called On and On, and it was inspired by Manifest, which is just on this side wall here. It's the one with the hands coming up out of the clouds with releasing the bird. So this one is called On and On. I love you. I love you, I love you, I love you. Across space and time, I love you. I love you, I love you, I love you. I kiss my lips to the air around me and take it in, blooming my lungs till they pollinate my blood with oxygen, and my blood ripens bright red, blushing. I am alive with this air. I am alive with these words. I love you. I love you, I love you, I love you. I chant this into eternity until blood becomes air again and back out to you, through you and back out, to me and again, I love you. I love you, I love you, I love you, forever in every form, trading back and forth rhythmically, unending I love you. I love you, I love you, I love you. Thank you.